Food for Thought with Professor David Ndete.
Welcome to another episode of Food for Thought with Professor Ndete. On this episode, we want to begin a discussion on what is known as borderline personality disorder, to get to understand what it is, how it manifests itself, and what do we need to know about this mental disorder. Professor Ndete, it's good to have you again.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Yes.
Borderline personality disorder.
Yes.
Before you even get into that, I must say that these conversations that I've been having with you over the last couple of months have made me realize how we have so many mental disorders that I didn't even know about.
We have more than 300.
300?
Documented.
So we have barely scratched the surface.
And as time goes, we add more and more as we begin to recognize them.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So borderline personality disorder, what is it?
Well, I think before we even start talking about borderline personality disorder, what is a personality disorder in general?
Mm-hmm.
I think that will be a very good starting point.
Okay.
But even before we start talking about disorder, what is personality? That's so fundamental.
Yeah.
Personality is more or less a lay word. We come to recognize people by the way they behave, the way they carry themselves. And we can say, well, if you hear a story about so-and-so who is behaving like this and that, and then you can almost say that must be so. That must be that person or my friend, because that kind of behavior describes my friend.
Yeah.
So it is a persistent way of behaving, which tends to start very early in life. It's like they were born with it, and it may not become manifest until adolescence or even later, early adulthood. So when we talk about personality, is what characterizes a person.
Yeah.
So that we can say he's a nice person, he's a polite man, he's an arrogant man. We come to recognize that.
Yes.
And that's normal. We all have our own personalities. There is nobody who doesn't have certain traits that characterize him as an individual.
Yeah.
But it becomes a disorder when the behavior of that person seems to be out of the ordinary, out of the normal range. In terms of the environment in which he lives, in terms of the culture in which he lives, his behavior is out of the ordinary. So we start talking about a personality disorder. Of course, there are very many different types of personality disorders, but before all of them share certain characteristics.
Okay.
That disorders now, they tend to start very early in life, adolescence, early adulthood. They are pervasive. They seem to be there all the time. Basically, they are not the easiest ones to manage. Now, when it comes to borderline, and there are very many different types of personality disorders, when it comes to borderline personality disorder, here the most distinguishing feature is their emotional liability. There is something very strange about the way they control their emotions.
Okay.
So it starts from within and manifests itself in behavior. It's what they perceive, how they perceive the environment, they perceive themselves, they perceive the people around them, they perceive the environment and the emotions that are attached to that.
Okay.
So and these emotions that come from within, eventually they find expression, which is what we people see, what everybody else sees. But what we don't see is what is happening in themselves. And of course, we see the behavior. And the fundamental problem is that they have problem in controlling the emotions. The emotions change so fast and very unpredictable sometimes, and so on. So they try as much as possible to create an emotional environment where they feel comfortable. And in terms of understanding, feeling comfortable, they want to know whether I am the one who is wrong, or is the people around me who are wrong, or it is an environment that is not right. But the whole thing is controlling their stability of their emotions. We see very many of these cases, borderline personality disorders.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. And if I describe a few cases, I'm sure you have seen them.
Okay.
All over. Of course, you see them in the communities, in the general population. For example, I have patients who have come here and they have been brought in by relatives or even friends, and they will tell you, oh, this friend of mine, we went to school together. And even when you were in school, when you were in high school, or when you were in the university, there was something quite not out of the ordinary. We just couldn't figure out what it is or what it was that time. Now we can say probably we knew there was a problem, but we know what the problem was. And then it reaches a stage where then they need to see doctors, or they need to seek for help. So very common in the general population, but you tend to see more in clinical settings because they have reached a stage where the people who are around them, they somehow don't know. Basically, they don't know how to handle this kind of person. So when you have that person who has this kind of behavior, and when you talk to them, you find that is their inability to control the emotions, then you realize there's a problem there. And of course, as I said, many people don't think they don't know that there's a problem, or they know that there's a problem, but they don't know what it is. So when you get that kind of description, you are most likely dealing with a borderline personality disorder.
So why is it called borderline?
Well, I don't know why they call it borderline, but basically it is a very descriptive term, borderline. Is it normal? Is it abnormal? It seems to be on the border.
Okay.
Are these emotional problems or not emotional problems? And this is what brings them to people, to see professionals, to actually be told, we don't understand, is this normal or abnormal? And as I said, people will say, there was something right from the beginning, and it has grown to this magnitude. So I think basically that could be the reason why they call it borderline. Okay. And remember, it is very common out there, maybe 2 to 5% of the population.
Wow.
We don't have our own statistics here. But one thing I know for sure, every time we looked for a certain condition using certain diagnostic criteria, which are used elsewhere, we always find almost identical, it's unbelievable, almost identical findings, telling you and me that we human beings are basically the same. Yes.
Okay. I'm just wondering, what other traits would one see in a person to come to the conclusion that they may be having borderline personality disorder?
I think the most important one is how they behave with other people, as it were, trying to control the emotions, especially when they are under a lot of stress. And I'll give you a very common example, which is very well known in Western settings. When I was training in UK, the most common emergency in casualties was, and I think it's still the same, was not people who had been involved in accidents. It was about young people who would come slashing themselves, having slashed themselves on the wrists, as if they want to kill themselves. But in natural fact, they do not want to kill themselves. The motive is not to kill themselves. The motive is to see how best they can cope with their emotions, because they are so much overwhelmed with their emotional instability. They may be anxious, they may be depressed. These are, we say, they tend to go together, and we'll come back to that. We call it comorbidity. But more often than not, it's about relationship with other people. It may be a relationship with a friend, a boyfriend, or a girlfriend. It may be issues to do with the parents or people who are very close to them. It may even be teachers, people they have close emotional relationship with. They cannot control the emotion in terms of that kind of relationship.
Unfortunately, our time is up for today. Time flies so fast when you are having fun, and I'm really having fun getting some information and getting educated on mental health issues. We haven't quite finished with borderline personality disorder. We'll pick up this conversation again next week on Food for Thought with Professor Ndetey. Have yourselves a great day.
Food for Thought with Professor David Ndetey.